It's the lead play in our offense.
Tell the tackle to take the defensive end if he's over him. If he's not, you drive down the first man who is inside. Pull back and tell him to take the first man outside the offensive tackle. No one shows. Go right by them and field inside. If the YN has the linebacker taken out, he cuts inside. If the YN has the linebacker in, he comes all the way around. If you look at this play, what we're trying to get is a seal here and a seal here, and try to run this play in the alley.
All right, what's up, guys? Welcome into Packers Total Access. My name is Clayton. You can check us out on packernet.com. You can find me on Twitter at Packers_access. If you'd like to email the show, you can send a message to PackersTotalAccess@gmail.com. You can text the show at 865-658-5824. We're live on YouTube and Twitter. Got my good buddy Dusty Evely on tonight. Man, I'll tell you, if you dislike watching football and catching a play here or there, watching the highlights, and you like watching touchdowns scored and you don't really care about anything else, turn away from this podcast right now, because we're about to get nerdy up in here, man. This is going to be the podcast. This is going to be the YouTube video for those of you that just can't get enough of the schematics and kind of the history around how things have unfolded in the NFL, and more specifically with this Kyle Shanahan, really Mike Shanahan, really Bill Walsh coaching tree, right? So, Dusty, first of all, man, how have you been doing? Because I'll tell you this, Dusty. I was like, I need to get Dusty back on the show, but I don't want to bother him. When was the last time I had him on? It was May. I was like, oh, he's coming on the show. Like, it's been way too long. I didn't realize it'd been that long. But how you been?
I've been good, man. I can't remember what we talked about. It feels like every time we talk, it's just like, I don't remember what we talk about. I just remember it was football and it was great. So specifics, I don't remember. No, I've been good, dude. Off season's winding down here a little bit. I had a couple of projects I was working on, trying to dig into, and those are kind of winding down. And so I'm kind of in a spot now where, like, got a couple things I'm working on, but really I'm just kind of waiting for the season to start. And man, training camp's right around the corner. I'm doing great, brother. It's like the calm before the storm right now.
Absolutely, dude. And you guys, obviously, you know me, you know him. He's a writer at Cheesehead TV, Packer Report, Pack a Day Podcast. You're all over the place, dude. Every time you've got something, whether it's, writing or putting up a new YouTube video, breaking down X's and O's, I'm there. Again, I'm always going to say it. I know you probably don't care. You may blush, but like I said, I call you the Greg Cosell of Packer fans, man. You're the dude I turn to when I go, what does this actually mean? I search Dusty Evely and that concept and see if you got anything on, right? Because I love the approach, man. You don't come from like this cocky standpoint of I know more than you. It's just, hey, look, let's dive into this and figure it out together. That's what I'm all about. So
I've said it before. I've probably said it here. My entire approach has always been, I'm trying to dig into a point where it makes sense in my brain. And I figure if I can make it make sense to myself, if I can explain it to myself, maybe someone else can get it as well. So it's really it's trying to calm the voices in my head. So I'm always amazed that anyone cares about what I do, because really it's just, I'm trying to learn more about football, and I'm happy if people are along for the ride. But I'm sure you're the same way, dude. For everything I learn, every step I feel like I take, where I'm like, all right, I understand the game a little better, I realize just how little I know about
right.
all of it. So it's just trying to dig in to understand as much as possible. And I feel like it's one step forward, 15 steps back sometimes.
Oh, dude, I completely relate. And obviously the reason we're on here tonight, guys, the podcast dropped, the 5-part series by Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic, and it was called The Playcallers. And it highlights, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Mike McDaniel, and kind of how they come up the coaching ranks. And it's just such a phenomenal story. And I know while I was listening to it the night it released, I think it was after midnight, if I remember correctly. It was early the next morning is when I listened to it. And then immediately, what did I see? I seen you post the drift concept. And I was like, Dusty's on it, dude. He's already on it. He's combing through the tape. He's combing through the images. What are they talking about with drift? Just phenomenal. Let's do this, guys. Let's kind of set the stage. We got Jacob in the house. Hey, appreciate you hopping in, Jacob. Good to have you. So let's kind of set the stage of how we got to this point, because understand that this podcast, again, we're not going to sit here and try to explain everything about this podcast. Everyone needs to go listen to it for themselves. We're just going to talk about some takeaways and things that we learned, almost like a mastermind, if you will, in this. And really the podcast picks up when the guys arrived in Washington, when Kyle Shanahan was hired to be the OC in Washington. Okay. So before that, let's talk about how they got there, Dusty. First of all, in the 70s, this West Coast offense goes all the way back to the 70s, really. It was something that was kind of inspired by Sid Gilman and Don Coryell. You guys know, you've heard Air Coryell, this huge vertical passing attack that they used with the Raiders and other places. I think it was Sid Gilman that actually coached in an alternate pro football league. He also coached in college. John Madden was tied to these coaches. And if I remember correctly, Bill Walsh spent 1 year with the Raiders. And then, of course, he was hired by Paul. Actually, he went on to be a general manager and head coach of another professional league. I found that out. That was really cool. And then Paul Brown, the great Cincinnati coach, hires him as his offensive coordinator, right? So you guys have probably already heard the story. Their starting quarterback goes down. They trade for a backup. Well, that backup didn't have a strong enough arm to kind of attack with that Don Coryell or that Sid Gilman approach of vertical passing. So what Bill Walsh did was he set up a system that was a short passing attack that would fit his new smart, accurate quarterback. Okay, so once he does that, it really takes off. People dubbed it as the West Coast offense because it really got popular on the West Coast, but it actually should have been called the Midwest offense, right?
I said there's a really interesting, I won't get into it here, but there's a really interesting story that Dr. Z, the late Dr. Z, talks about how the West Coast offense was termed. And it was basically someone misheard something over the phone while they were calling in a report to their editor, I believe is what it was. But I think that's in the Thinking Man's Guide to Pro Football or something. But Dr. Z has a great story about like how that name came to be. Because it is, you think that was always my thing is, what's West Coast? It's because it's San Francisco. Well, it was developed really in Cincinnati as far as this iteration of it. But it's very, very interesting. I love that.
It's awesome because he said, man, my quarterback has got a noodle arm, but there's 53 yards that we can use horizontally here. Let's stretch this thing out horizontally, right? And I even heard when he went to the 49ers, I think he had read, and it might have been before San Francisco, he had read I believe it was a John Wooden book talking about the triangle offense. And he talked about attacking a zone on the field, a spot on the field. And to this day, guys, that's what football is. You're attacking space on offense, and on defense, you're defending space. And like we'll talk about later on, how Robert Saleh talked about how their defense evolved in San Francisco after he came over from from Seattle, I should say. What they learned to do is you got to move that zone. You got to move that space around, right? And make the offense think. It sounds simple, but it's so profound. Bill Walsh is obviously hired by the 49ers in the 80s. He installs the new system. It absolutely dominates. Now, in 1992, he had to hire a new offensive coordinator because Mike Holmgren left for Green Bay. So you can see how things are starting to intertwine and the tree's starting to branch off. That new offensive coordinator was Mike Shanahan. Now, of course, Mike Shanahan is hired by the Denver Broncos in 1995 as head coach. Now, when he's hired, the first thing he does is he goes to Kansas City, a division rival, and hires their offensive line coach, Alex Gibbs, who has a zone blocking scheme, and he becomes his assistant head coach, and he's obviously the offensive line coach. So what you have here is Mike Shanahan taking Bill Walsh's West Coast offense, and he's marrying up Alex Gibbs' zone blocking system, his zone blocking scheme, and that's how Denver established themselves and basically went on to win back-to-back Super Bowls in 97 and 98. I know that one still hurts. That's all we're going to mention of it. We're going to move on. But let's fast forward now, guys. 2010. So from, whenever he left Denver, roughly I would say a decade later, maybe a little more, he pops up in Washington as the new head coach, right? For the Washington football team, Commanders, whatever you want to call them, right? So what's he do? The first thing he does is he hires his son as offensive coordinator. His son had been coaching in Houston with several of his buddies, right? So basically, Mike Shanahan lures them all to Washington, and that is where this podcast begins. Dusty, let me ask you this, man. As soon as they get to Washington, right? Well, hold on. Let me back up a minute. This is really cool. In 2011, so as he's hired as OC I think it was in 2010 or 2011, the season, Matt LaFleur is actually the quarterback's coach, right? Mm-hmm. Sean McVay is the tight ends coach. Mike McDaniel in 2011 was hired as offensive assistant, but he was fired by Houston for drinking on the job. So he got kind of into boozing a little bit too much on the job site there. And then, of course, I have heard, Dusty, maybe you can confirm this, maybe you haven't heard. I heard that it was Matt LaFleur that actually vouched for
Yeah, that was in
Mike
a
McDaniel.
Kevin Clark story last offseason over on the Ringer. He wrote something about the relationship between LaFleur and it was basically about LaFleur, and it was tangentially about Rodgers, but it was kind of like this is LaFleur's moment to shine type of thing. And there's a quote in that piece. I can't remember the name of it. But there's a quote in that piece from McDaniel basically saying like, I wouldn't be coaching the NFL if not for Matt LaFleur. He's one of the finest men I've ever known. Blah 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 blah. But that's basically what it is. He credits his entire NFL career at this point to LaFleur kind of getting him back in after falling out of good graces after his time in Houston.
Absolutely. And if you step back a second and go, okay, well, yeah, Matt LaFleur kind of got him back in the good graces, but how did he get that job in the first place? Really cool story. When Mike Shanahan was the head coach in Denver, they had a ball boy. That ball boy was Mike McDaniel.
That's right.
And Kyle Shanahan, running around on the sidelines, became really good friends with Mike McDaniel. So later on, when Kyle gets his shot and Mike's already in football, he hires him as an offensive assistant. And he really, if there was something I'd say, Dusty, that Mike McDaniel was dubbed as, it's kind of a run specialist, isn't he? It seems like he's kind of dove into the blocking and running aspect of the offense. So,
yeah, and he talked about that, right? That was like the way to differentiate himself, where he was like, it was more or less paraphrasing here. I can't compete with McVay and LaFleur because that was the big thing of like they wanted to score points by getting plays on Shanahan's call sheet. And that was like the big competition. And at some point, McDaniel was like, well, I can't do that. I can't compete with those guys. Those guys are lunatics, but I can become very good at the running game because you could say that kind of shift that Shanahan was going to go into. And I think when they all got fired, when Mike Shanahan got fired, the one assistant he could take was Mike McDaniel, because McDaniel, found this market inefficiency basically and exploited that in terms of like, these other guys have everything else under control. I'm going to be an expert in the running game, which is, I mean, to me, it's fascinating in terms of, I'm sure stuff we'll touch on later, but in terms of how this the branches of this have grown and they've made the system their own. Because when you think of Mike McDaniel now, I certainly don't think of him as a run game guy, but that's what he was in San Francisco. He's run game coordinator, assistant offensive coordinator in San Francisco. Yep. I mean, they pass a crazy amount in Miami. Like you think of that passing crew. So to see like what they specialized in, like kind of how they end up going is fascinating to me. And I think the McDaniel story is a very interesting one.
Yeah, no, very well said. Very well said. And there's some of the schematics, the eye candy, if you will, reminds me of San Francisco and Miami, but you could hear him talking on that podcast too, of the things he was trying to do off of boot action with Tua, him being a lefty. That's something that's kind of uncommon. We got Dave in the chat said, this is going to be great. Love watching Dusty stuff. I agree. And then of course, DJ Key in the house said, this is awesome. We appreciate you guys tagging along with us. All right, let's do this. Washington, when they arrive in Washington, I'm going to give you first shot at this, Dusty. I just want you to say the first thing that comes to mind when the podcast begins and it talks about the Washington days. What's the first thing that comes to mind? What sticks out to you about those that Washington era there with Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay, Mike McDaniel, all of them?
It's when you can see all that stuff kind of coming together, because I think they started implementing it. I think that was in Washington, because we talked about that. In Houston, they were under Kubiak, who was, right, the Mike Shaniest of Mike Shaniest guys is Gary Kubiak. And they did a lot of boot stuff. And a lot of the stuff you think of now, like wide zone stuff and the bootleg stuff, you think of Kubiak. And Shanahan talked about, like, they didn't really do play action off of that. He learned play action to, if we want to like even ingrain this a little further, Paul Hackett, which was old West Coast guy under Walsh, obviously Nate Hackett's dad. He was a big play action guy. So I think when they got to Washington, and Shanahan was like, this is my offense, I think he said he installed like 2 play action passes, one of them being the drift concept. But I think you think of that offense. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, it's hard to think of that year of that offense without thinking about, I from the rooftops, I was screaming, RG3 is going to be better than Andrew Luck. Now, maybe that would have happened and maybe it wouldn't. I think like his Baylor stuff is incredible. He could move. He was incredibly accurate. But you look at Jordan Rodriguez did such a good job of kind of talking about kind of how this came to be. But you see all these backgrounds, and okay, you've got the boot stuff. Shanahan now has his own offense, and he's starting to do some of the play action stuff. They're experimenting with some of the running stuff. That is still that wide zone base, because that is a Mike Shanahan offense, and Kyle's underneath him. And now you've got this quarterback who now we think of as, it's almost like a mold for like this new age of quarterback. These guys who have to move, which is where the league feels like it's going. Back then, you had the zone read stuff. Like there's all of this. It was this perfect marriage of, we've got wide zone. We're also maybe trying to work in some gap stuff. We've got play action passes that's very effective. Because now, I mean, the lowest play action team in the league, if you're looking now, is like 25% of their passes are play action passes. That was not the case even like not that long ago. And then you've got this uber athlete running this stuff and you're catering it to him to some extent, while also like all this stuff. That's what jumped out to me is like, I knew what that Washington offense looked like. That Washington offense, RG3's rookie year, positively electric until the injury. I mean, that the injury was terrible. That playoff game, I still remember, it's like he couldn't step into his throws. His knee was not there. And it stunk. And I think we were robbed of what could have been a tremendous career. But I remember that. And when I think of that year, I think of zone read. But hearing about all the background of all those guys and how that came together, it made a whole lot more sense. It wasn't just zone read. It was the backgrounds of all of these guys, all of their histories, all of their now like expertise and specials, even at a very young age, kind of coming together and doing that. It was kind of a fascinating look back at an offense that was a lot of fun to watch, even without any of that context.
Absolutely. Jacob in the chat says, Mike McDaniel, we were talking about this. Mike McDaniel may be my favorite origin story, villain/hero story, depending on how it turns out. Laughing emoji. Legit, though, this should have been an ESPN 30 for 30, man. I'm glad somebody else feels like that because, and we were talking about it offline. I don't think we should go into too much detail about what we talked about offline, but I'll just say Mike McDaniel sticks out big time. We'll just leave it at that. Now, the thing that stood out to me was how they built that zone read for RG3, right? So basically they draft RG3 and Kyle Shanahan said, okay, the first thing he started to do is just combing through all of his college tape, right? And he's like, okay, what did he do good? You know, let's kind of get familiar with him. And what he picks up on is the read option, obviously, right? And one of the things that he said he understood was he looked at the tape and said, man, when this thing gets blown up, it's because people were essentially what he was saying is attacking the mesh point in the read option, and they were attacking on the running back side. He said, well, if I do install this, the first thing I'm going to do is run it out of pistol so they can't guess which side we're going to run it out of. Freaking brilliant. And then he said, also in the pistol, it just so happens we can run our outside zone out of the pistol. So it was just this perfect – kudos to Kyle Shanahan. I've been one just because I hate the 49ers. I've wanted to just constantly be like, he isn't as good as people think or whatever. After hearing this, I'm like,
he's incredible. Yeah.
That dude is driven. He's a visionary. He's a hard worker. Like, yeah, he's everything you would want in a head coach. And it just pains me to know that he's with the 49ers, but it is what it is. So noticing that weakness on the backside, like I said, that was something that stood out to me, how he immediately dissected that. And then, of course, the other thing too was when he brung RG3 in, if you'll remember, Dusty, he made him install a play. He made him create. You remember?
I love that story. It's such a good story.
You tell it. You could probably tell it better than me. Just briefly tell it.
Yeah, it was basically Shanahan told him like, all right, listen, today you're installing a play. Pick your favorite play from college. You're installing it. And RG3 was like, this is going to be great. And what he said, there was a whole bunch of option routes on it because I mean that Baylor, that was that Uber spread system, and it was vertical option, like stuff all over the place. Think of like Tennessee now. And Shanahan said something to the effect of like, these guys are going to be running into each other. And he said, RG3's like, that's never going to happen. It's going to be fine. And so he installed it. And I think he said he completed it in time, in rhythm to his 3 read. But he said the blocking was a mess. Like 2 guys ran into each other. And so he said he installed it every single day for, I don't know, like a week. I don't remember what the time frame was, but they installed it up during a lot of practice until they eventually got it right. And then Shanahan said, do you know why I asked you to install that? And he said, no, just thought you wanted a cool play from college you wanted to put in. And he said, I want to let you know like how much work that is, and as much care as you put in making that play work. That's what I do for every play that I put in there, which to me was a twofold thing. That was, you can trust my game plan because you know the amount of care I'm putting into this. But also I love listening to Kyle Shanahan. I think he's incredible. Yeah. Big ego on that guy. So on the other side of that, you could also read into that as like, don't question my game plan.
Exactly. He put that to bed. And it's what great visionaries do, whether it's sports, business, or whatever. The great leaders, they can identify a problem before it even arrives. And they've got a plan to, and right off the bat, it was, hey, look, let's show him what it's like to take ownership. You know, RG3 said, he said, and this was his words. He said, he was right. I wasn't going to let that play fail. That was my play, and I was not going to let it fail. And it really kind of put him in Shanahan's shoes, if you will. It's just a phenomenal story. And that's the thing about this. Like I said, we can't explain everything about this podcast. You have to listen to it for yourself. But it's just story after story like that, just perfectly put together. She absolutely crushed it. Let's do that. Is there anything else you want to hit on in their time in Washington before we move on to Atlanta?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it really is. It really was not a long amount of time. It's what, 2 years? I think maybe they were in Washington. Like
Right.
it really was not that long. No, I think we covered it pretty well.
And so there was a brief stint that Kyle Shanahan, if I understood correctly, was offensive coordinator in Cleveland. And then
For
when
a
he lost that
year,
job,
I think, maybe a
yeah,
year.
1 year, yeah. And then he went to Atlanta. He was hired as the offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons in 2015. Okay, so he's hired as the OC. He hires Matt LaFleur as the quarterback coach. Mike McDaniel's brought over as an offensive assistant, right? And the thing that really stood out to me about that story is, okay, at this point, if you had stopped at this point, Dusty, and said, "What is the Kyle Shanahan offense?" You would say wide zone, read option, right?
Play
That's
action.
yeah, play action, wide zone, read option, right? Well, he gets to Atlanta, and what's he do? Matt Ryan isn't going to run the read option. So one of the things that kind of developed there was what they called the turbo package. So they started using some hurry up, right? And they started putting stress on the defense that way. You guys remember? I mean, that was kind of a thorn in our side for a little bit there as far as playing Green Bay. In Atlanta, they had obviously nobody could cover Julio Jones, right? They had an excellent running game as well with the wide zone look, and they ran that turbo package. And of course, Matt Ryan wins the MVP in 2016. And just a stellar offense that they created there. Like I said, an MVP caliber performance, which I think it's kind of cool that Matt LaFleur is tied to 3 MVPs and a Rookie of the Year. Think about that, because RG3 won Rookie of the Year. That gives me a little more confidence in Jordan Love this year. Like, hey, maybe we've got the guy that can put this together. Again, back to back to back. So, what stands out to you about Atlanta there when they were there, Kyle Shanahan?
Yeah, I think the turbo stuff, which then came into play later. I know Shanahan said that that's one of the reasons he hated letting LaFleur go to the Rams with McVay, is just because then they installed the turbo package off of there. And I think the turbo package, more than anything, I mean, that's something that I know all of us have thought about, like, why don't the package use more tempo? And the thing was like, well, it's too many. The language is too long. But then hearing LaFleur installed that turbo package, I don't think it was in Atlanta. I think it was when they took it to LA, and then him and McVay tinkered with it and built motion in the turbo package, which was like unheard of. Like, you no huddle with how do you even make that work with the language? Like, it's insane to me. But I think that was one of my big things from there was, you had the Ryan thing, which he was good before that. Matt Ryan was a good quarterback, and then took it to new levels with LaFleur, which was fascinating. But yeah, to me it's the turbo package, and I zoned out a little after they said that, because I was like, started dreaming of what may be in 2023.
I couldn't tell you how many times during that podcast I found myself not paying attention because it branched my thought process off. I was like, no, stop. Listen to what she's freaking saying, Clayton. Stop for a second, please. I see here in the chat real quick. Garrison Anderson says, I think how Shanahan, McVay, McDaniel, and LaFleur each adapt to the quarterback they're working with should bode well for LaFleur and Love in 2023. I completely agree. And that's one of the things that I came away with that I was hoping other people would too, is everyone just wants to say, in Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers was running Mike McCarthy's offense. He wasn't really running LaFleur's. And we know that wasn't the case. There may be some elements here or there, but what you really seen was LaFleur doing exactly what McVay did when he went to the LA Rams. Shanahan, exactly what he started with, playing to the quarterback strengths there in Washington. And then, of course, when he goes to Atlanta, them creating the turbo package. And then as we fast forward to the LA Rams, in 2017, after McVay actually stayed as OC in Washington, then he was hired as the head coach for the LA Rams in 2017. So a lot of people don't know McVay. From what I understand, when the staff was fired, he stayed in Washington for another year or two. And then, of course, he was hired as the head coach of the LA Rams. So what did he do? He goes to the LA Rams. He immediately hires Matt LaFleur as his OC in LA. And then, of course, Matt LaFleur later on, just a little side note, the next year, I believe it was, if I remember correctly, in 2018, he would go to Tennessee simply because he wanted to call plays, and McVay wasn't giving that up, right? So It's kind of cool how that branched off. That's how he ended up in Tennessee. But when it came to the Rams, like you were saying, when they installed the turbo package and a little bit of motion with it on the fly as well, they really seen Jared Goff take off, and it got him a big contract, didn't it? I mean, that's something that Jared Goff, it kind of clicked for him, right?
Yeah, no, I mean that was, he was terrible that last year under Jeff Fisher. And that was the thing with Goff too. That was a bit of like, I don't think he should have been 1-1. I don't think there's a whole lot of, if I remember correctly, it was a relatively weak draft for quarterbacks. And that was kind of he had a big arm and some promise maybe, but I don't know that a lot of people expected him to be like just incredible. A lot of the stuff that he hit on was schemed up, a lot of stuff in the flats, like kind of check down stuff like that. And so when he went 1-1, and then that first year under Fisher, like his rookie year was like, this might just be who he is. So when McVay came in, did that turbo package, they did a lot of that, not necessarily point and shoot. You hear some of the Shanahan stuff is kind of like point and shoot, but it kind of simplified in terms of understanding. You talked about that with Salah a little later with the like understanding where to attack based on. I think that's the kind of rambling a little bit here. That's the thing, and Roderick talks about this. But one of the things that McVay and Shanahan do so well that comes up with the Salah stuff is they understand defenses and defensive weaknesses better than a lot of times run offensive systems. And I think that's Shanahan started, if I'm not mistaken, when he was in Tampa Bay charting defensive stuff. So like he really got into the defensive side of the ball. And so like that kind of, I think McVay took that mastery, got the turbo package, that play action, that leaning into that at the time, like historic levels with McVay with Goff in those early Rams years, like using play action. Studies were coming out at that time saying, you don't have to have a good run game to run play action. You just have to have looks you're willing to run in. And then there was no breaking point. No one had found a breaking point. You can run play action as much as you want. And they're running 35% of the time. So they're making it basically as easy as humanly possible for Goff with a head coach that knows how to call the plays, knows how to sequence plays, and also understands what the defense is trying to do better than just about anyone. And so, yeah, that explosion with Goff, those whatever couple years, especially that second year, because I think he came in Goff's second year, if I'm not mistaken. That was just like, he might actually be a good quarterback. He just had Jeff Fisher coaching him. Like it's just that it's again that kind of, you've seen how he's grown, even though he was only 30 when he got the head coaching job.
That's crazy. We were talking about on the pod tonight.
Insane. That's absolutely insane. But yeah, the fact that all he had been through and all he kind of understood at that point kind of came in perfect for a guy who was, it's still not great at that time. And some of the stuff with Goff a little later with McVay, some of the interpersonal stuff, like I understand that, but like there was things he could do. And I think McVay leaned into those really, really well and helped that fit into kind of what he wanted to do and his knowledge with how to exploit defenses it was fascinating to look at that.
Yeah, and there will be no McVay slander on my channel because that dude, I know a lot of people go, I think he's overrated. He was the youngest coach to win a Super Bowl in NFL history. And he's been to 2 already. Mm-hmm. Like, that's insane. It's absolutely insane with 2 different quarterbacks. I don't know how many head coaches could say that, But in 2019, of course, McVay got to his first Super Bowl there with the LA Rams, and he gets absolutely annihilated, Dusty. He gets annihilated by Bill Belichick. Low-scoring Super Bowl. Now, what did Belichick do? What he did was he presented a 6-man front. Now, the way that Belichick liked to use it is he brung an extra safety onto the line of scrimmage with that 6-man front. So basically what he said is, we're going to make you play left-handed. It's Bill Belichick 101. It's the bullseye defense that he runs, which basically he says, okay, what's their top target? All right, we're going to double team that guy with our number 2 and number 3 corner, and then we're going to put our number 1 corner on their number 2 option. So with their top 2 options are completely shut down. Well, in the running game and the outside zone aspect of Sean McVay's offense, what he said was, we're going to make them play left-handed. We're taking that outside zone away. And man, they did, Dusty. So that's something that sparked a whole new era of defense across the league because, like they pointed out, the following year, in 2020, the NFL basically copied that with wide fronts, right? So they started presenting wide fronts. They understood that a wide 9 tech or even a little less than that is enough to stop that wide zone and deter these offenses from running wide zone. It's just amazing because, Dusty, when Belichick shut him down like that, if it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't have these wide 9 quarter coverages now, right? Now, Fangio was already running quarters, right? And this is just for those of you who know, the reason that came about is because what teams are really keying in on are what we call explosive plays of 20 yards or more. And what they found is the statistics show that if you hit an explosive play, then it triples your chance of scoring on that drive. So as a defense, what's your number 1 goal? Other than takeaways, of course. Takeaways, turnover differential wins ball games all the time, all day long. What they said was, all right, let's take away the explosives. What are the top explosives? Outside zone in the running game and vertical passing. So what's the best way to shut down explosives on vertical passing? Quarter coverage. What's the best way to stop outside runs? Wide technique, wide 9, wide, whatever, 7 tech, whatever you want to play. So that's what they installed as the defense moving forward. We'll get into it a little bit more later. But with McVay getting his butt handed to him in that Super Bowl, now everybody copied that with wide fronts to take away that wide zone. Now in 2021, what did he do, Dusty? He shifted to 11 personnel to maximize the wide receivers. I love what he said. He said, I looked up and I got Cooper Kupp sitting on the sideline. I'm going, what am I doing? Right? Do you remember him saying that in the pod?
Yeah.
So what sticks out to you about that 2021 year when McVay, of course, they go and they trade for Stafford and they go on to win the Super Bowl? What kind of sticks out to you with that?
I mean, a couple things. I mean, that's part of it is you're adapting to what the league is doing. You're trying to find new ways to attack it and kind of seeing who you need to attack that with. It's not Goff isn't going to do that. Goff's not going to be the guy to do that. And I think that there's a handful of things I think to take away. Goff is not the guy that they wanted to do that. And so they thought that maybe Stafford could be that guy. But even if not, the way that was going is because, well, the other thing with that too, it's a combination of quarters and just that too high pre-snap quarters looks. I remember, I think that was something Shanahan said when he was with Saleh, was that he got together with Saleh and he was like, oh, you guys are just running cover 3. Like you guys are just running cover 3. You're just rotating that guy out. Like this isn't, because I think he was looking at it going, it's like quarters match and you're rotating that guy down like on the weak side. It's like, no, you guys just straight are running cover 3. You're just running it out of like this too high shell. He's like, yeah, that's right. Like I'm basically the guy I've always been. I'm
buzz,
just
right? Was it called buzz? Am I thinking right? Where you
I think so, yeah. Where it almost looks like a robber thing, but you're spinning those guys. Yep. And so, I mean, that's part of it then. And I know how Stafford wanted to operate, because that was one of the big things in the podcast. And then something I know I talked about before as well has been Goff liked his under center play action, because McVay still wanted to do his play action. Goff liked his under center play action. Well, with that rise of the defenses, the picture looks different when you turn. You got too high, you got your two guys, you turn your back to the play action. Well, Rodgers doesn't want to do the under center play action. Turn around, do the play action. You come back around. Maybe you got too high. Maybe those guys have spun. Maybe they're running some kind of invert coverage. And then you have in your mind, you've got your pre-snap picture, your post-snap picture. You take your pre-snap picture and say, I've got these guys here. If this guy moves here, like my number one read is here. If it's all that. Well, then you turn around. No one is where you thought they were going to be. They're not even running the same coverage, the same shell coverage like you thought they were running. And now suddenly you don't know where your number one read is supposed to be. And so Stafford was a guy where he was like, okay, we still want to run this. We still want to run our core passing concepts to some extent. Like we still want to keep those. We still want to keep the play action. We need a guy that can operate out of gun, so that when he does those play action, eyes can be up. You can see where those guys are rotating, and then you can exploit from there. And I mean, that's been one of those. That's evolution of the league. That's evolution of the system. That's finding who. I mean, and I think there's a couple different ways to go about it. You either find the guy that you say, like, this is what we need to run. I need to find the guy that can do this, or you say, I have the guys that I have. How do I use the guys I have best? And I believe McVay. If McVay didn't get Stafford, he still tries to make that work somehow with Goff, where he gets someone else out of like an air raid system who's a little more comfortable operating out of shotgun all the time to do some of that stuff. But I mean, that's to me, that's one of that's the coaching thing, right? I'm not asking my guy to do something he can't do. So we either get the guy who can do what I want him to do, or I've got to figure out another solution to this problem. And that was the easiest solution. Was they're going to try to make this hard on us. Okay, my guy's going to be in shotgun. We're spreading them out. You can only spin so much because you don't want to give up integrity on the back end, which you're doing if you move guys around too much. And so I thought that was kind of a fascinating look into terms of like, we got Stafford not because we thought he was good, but because we thought he was good. He thought he was available to us. And this is where we think the league is going in terms of how I think I can find answers to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they begin to go 11 personnel heavy, and people will see that and they think, well, that's not the Shanahan system. Shanahan runs 21 personnel. Guys, it's the same passing concepts. It's the same, Bill Walsh was notorious for that. He said, I'm always trying to accomplish the same thing. I need to give it the illusion of complexity when it's really simple. We're running the same type of concepts. We're attacking space on the field.
Mm-hmm.
It's just phenomenal, man. And of course, as the outside zone took over, they made it sound on that podcast as if that's what ran Pete Carroll's cover 3 defense kind of out of the league. It was, outside zone kind of began to do that. And of course, they dominated in the early 2010s. You guys know the Legion of Boom, all that phenomenal defense. Well, Robert Saleh actually came over to the 49ers from Seattle, and that's what Dusty was alluding to. And that story was great, Dusty. When the way and maybe I misunderstood it, maybe I didn't. It seemed like Kyle Shanahan was like, y'all weren't running quarters with
Yeah.
He's like, no, we were just running cover 3, and they're all trying to. And the competition, Dusty, of Robert Saleh and Shanahan challenging each other to the point where they'd go like a week without talking. They were so mad at each other.
I loved, what was that? And there's the thing on there where it makes it sound like they're talking through the headset sometime.
Yes.
And Saleh's telling a story about like they're getting killed on defense and Shanahan's just yelling, do something.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I'm not playing on sound defense, and they fought and they figured something out during the week. Like, just that stuff's fascinating.
Yeah, so, again, as they start to look at the explosives and all that stuff, that's where they all kind of came up with the idea of, hey, look, why don't we run a Fangio quarter system with some man principles and stuff on the back end, and let's give a wide look on the front against the running game, and bam, it takes off. And now you see all of these teams switching to that. Obviously, Brandon Staley, if you guys remember, Brandon Staley was with Vic Fangio, I believe, in Chicago and Denver. And then, of course, he gets the head coaching job. First of all, he joined Sean McVay in 2020 with the LA Rams to install that whole look. So Brandon Staley comes over in 2020 to the Rams, they install it. And then what happens in Green Bay? In 2021, Matt LaFleur hires Joe Barry, the linebackers coach for the LA Rams, to do what? Install wide 9 quarters defense, more or less. That's how we got to the point where we're at in Green Bay. And really on offense, like they were saying, it's all about attacking space. And I love what Robert Saleh said, Dusty. He said something along the lines of, as a defense, what you want to do is constantly be moving that space and moving the stress, or some people call the pressure. It's all about defending space and applying stress to the offense. And you got to constantly be moving those things. I come out of this pod with a little more respect for Robert Saleh. And I've always been of the Neanderthal way of thinking when it comes to football, that offensive coaches are smart and defensive coaches are just mad. That's it. And it's not freaking true. Like, these guys, Robert Saleh, like, to be able to put that together and work hand in hand with Kyle Shanahan, lower the ego, and both of them come up with that awesome defense. Guys, you guys know what that defense was like. And it all makes sense too. What year was it, Dusty? I'm kind of putting you on the spot. I'm trying to remember. What year was it that we got absolutely boat raced by the 49ers under LaFleur in the playoffs?
That was with the Niners. That was 19. That was his first year.
So in 2019, they ran the ball down our freaking throat. And then lo and behold, 2 years later, we're going, all right, we got to go with a wide look. We got to shut this outside zone down. It's just amazing, man. And here's the thing too. Everything in the league is cyclical, right? It's going to come and go. It's going to come back around. So what are we getting ready to get into now? I don't mean to get off topic, but the first thing that comes to mind is Brian Flores in Minnesota. Dusty, there's a lot of people writing Minnesota's defense off. They lost everybody. They're going to be horrible. And I'm sitting there looking at Flores going, hold up a minute now. This dude studied under Bill Belichick forever, running man coverage in that bullseye type defense, right? And you've seen what Belichick was able to do to this outside zone in the Super Bowl. He goes to Miami, gets his feet wet, and then where did he spend last year? He was with Pittsburgh. Pretty much a zone blitz defense for the most part, right? So this guy he's studied under 2 of the best defensive head coaches in the history of football. I don't write Minnesota's defense off. I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but I just don't think they're going to come out and flop. Do you?
I still kind of think they do, because I think to me it's when he had a chance to run his defense under everything else, what did he want to do? And he learned under those guys. Like he can be more variable, and I think that's what I'm trying to keep him at the back of my head. He is not always who he has shown he has been, because even whatever he's when we've seen him, when the chips are down, what he wants to do is he wants to bring pressure, and he wants to put his guys on islands. He wants man, and he wants to bring 5 or 6 dudes. If he could bring 7 guys at you every single down, I promise you he would do it. And so to me, that's part of it is, okay, if he is who we all think he is, or who I believe that he is, what he wants to do in his very bones is he wants to blitz and play man on the back end. They don't have the horses for that. They don't have the horses for that on any single level of that Vikings defense. Now, I wouldn't be shocked, like you said, given his background, he'd come out and not want to blitz a whole lot at all. He could come out and run a whole lot of very defense. He certainly has the background to do that stuff. But I think I think we're going to get the version of Flores that's just like, we don't have the horses, so we might as well just bring guys anyway and hope we hit you before you can get rid of the ball. So I don't think they're going to be good. I don't think any of that's on Flores. I don't think they have the horses there to do a whole lot, unless those like Lewis Seen, who played like one snap, and Andrew Booth has had back injuries back to college. Like, they've got guys who, if those guys can stay healthy and can like live up to their potential, maybe they could be good. But I think Flores is just going to like, or we're going to bring in 6 or 7 guys, and we're just going to have to deal with that. I think that's my guess as to how he goes. We'll see.
That's going to help me sleep tonight, because I'm just looking at him. I'm going, because I'm a Belichick nut, man. I love everything about I've studied him to the end. Any book that's written on Belichick, I've read. It's just, in my opinion, we've had the opportunity to see the greatest coach in the history of football in real time. And I know a lot of people don't like him, and they've been labeled as cheaters and this and that. I don't know, man. The way I was raised playing sports, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. We were always trying to get an
listen, he is a cheater. But he is also very good. It's the same thing to me as like Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds took HGH. Yeah, that Barry Bonds also had like a 65 on base percentage one year. Like, he is still like, he cheated, and that is bad for both of those guys. I am against cheating, but the vast majority of teams are cheating to some extent, and also they are very, very good in spite of that. So yeah, I'm with you. I think if you look at his game plans, you look at what he's able to do, I think it's I don't know how you come away with anything other than he's just a tremendous coach.
Yeah, definitely. Bob in the chat says, remember how everybody was talking about how tight end focused Tennessee was with LaFleur's OC? Then this draft, ... coincidence. Do you remember much about the Tennessee offense? Because I didn't really study into it. I didn't dig into Matt LaFleur's time in Tennessee. I know that it did produce, I think it was Arthur. Is it Arthur Smith that's in Atlanta now? I think he came from there. It might have been a tight end coach, ironically.
And then I think he was elevated to OC after LaFleur got the job. So he was OC in Tennessee, but he was tight end. I think tight end coach in Tennessee.
Do you know much about that Tennessee offense as far as personnel and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a minute since I looked at it. This is so I used to pick up random teams in the offseason to study to see what they were doing. So I had actually I was looking at the McVay offense when that was going, when LaFleur was there. And then for some reason I jumped to Tennessee when LaFleur was in Tennessee. So it's been a while since I've looked at it. There actually is. I've got a book back on my shelf. I don't know if you know Bobby Peters at all, but Bobby Peters writes a bunch of books. He actually has one on the Titans passing game from 18, the year LaFleur was there. So
really, there
check that out for sure. I mean, it is
a bank account, Dusty.
If you another book. I know, I'm sorry, dude. If you look at what the Rams were doing, and then you look at what the Packers are doing, I mean, it's basically the same stuff. You look at a lot of those concepts. I do think they were a little more 12 personnel heavy, and I know they had Delaney Walker, and I'm blanking on, they had at least one other like pretty good tight end there as well. And I think, not to deviate from the question, but that is something that you touched on as well when McVay came, when he said like, well, I got Cup sitting over there. One of the things that I love, and I think you did as well, like picking up on this, is like how all of these guys we already kind of talked about, like, they don't necessarily have a rigid system. You've got your system, you've got the system that you want, and then you've got what you can run. And McVay and LaFleur, when they came into LA, they wanted 12 personnel. Then they got there and went, this is dumb. Like, why would we do 12 personnel when we have these guys? And so, I mean, I think it is. I think Shanahan is to some extent, like, in their deepest heart, they want to do what Shanahan is doing. They would like to go heavier personnel. They want to go to 12 personnel. They want to base stuff around the run. Right now, they want more gap scheme run stuff with a lot of these same passing concepts behind it. They just haven't been able to. So, and I think Tennessee, we did see that in Tennessee. I do think it was a little 12 heavier. The offense was not great that year. They had Mariota, so you had a little more kind of run stuff in there as well. But I mean, I do think, and I don't know if this is going to be the year because of, rookie tight ends and that learning curve. I don't know if you want to base an offense around Tyler Davis and Josiah DeGuara, as much as I love Josiah DeGuara. I do think, not this year. If you want to look 2 years down the line, I do think that's what they're building for. I do think they want not just heavier, because I think that's really easy. I know for to look at and say, like, they want to go heavier, they want to go 12, they want more beef out there. Well, it's also about being variable and multiple. And those guys are not. I mean, the way you look at this now, like Tucker Kraft is, closer to a wide tight end than, say, Luke Musgrave is. but he's still a more dynamic receiver than any wide tight end that we've seen in a very long time. So, I mean, it's about being able to give those looks. And then, I mean, ultimately that's it. You're trying to create space. How do you create that space? And it's, you create space ultimately by getting guys who are very good, especially tight end position. You get guys who are very good blockers and can also receive. You look at what the Niners are able to do with George Kittle. You can do 1,000 things with a guy who can block really, really well. And then catch as well. I mean, the Patriots were doing that. The Patriots built an offense around Gronkowski and the man who will not name right now, just out of those same looks for that same exact reason.
Yeah. So we were doing a Christian Watson breakdown earlier on one of the pods, and we broke down like 6 plays. And Dusty, every time I seen Allen Lazard on the field, it's like I started daydreaming and seeing number 88. I'm going, I think Musgrave can do that. I think he can run that route. I think he can, be that decoy. Mm-hmm. And, when we had Andy Herman on the pod the other day, one of the things he pointed out, he said, I will say this, because I kind of threw up the whole tight ends are kind of slow to the game unless it's your Kittles, your Kelseys, your dominant tight ends. And let's hope that Musgrave is that. No reason to believe he is at this point. But he said, Clayton, one of the things he said that stood out to me, he said he took all the number 1 tight end snaps at camp. And they said that he made a big step from the first OTA to the second. And the first thing that triggered in my mind was, that sounds like Quay Walker from last year, and he got a bunch of playing time. Mm-hmm. Do you think they're going to roll with Musgrave and DeGuara for the most part, or do you think it's going to be something they lean on Tyler?
It'd be nice. I mean, I hope they do. I'm of the mind. Your mistake, Clayton, is listening to Andy Herman. Like, what?
Right?
Kidding. I love that dude. Love you, Andy. No, I mean, I do. I think. I mean, one of the big things with Musgrave. I mean, if I look at stuff in college and you look at what they're doing in the pros, a lot of those guys. The way I look at wide receiver blocking is, I don't care if you're good. Do you know where you're supposed to be, and are you trying? Are you able to lose slowly? Are you whiffing a lot? Like, are you giving effort? And you look at Luke Musgrave did not have a ton of college tape, but he's a dude who tried. Like, he tried to block. He could block. But what you're asking from a guy in college versus what you're asking a guy from the pros in terms of technique, the level of man you're trying to block is entirely different. So, I mean, I could see Musgrave. What I've been thinking about Musgrave is, I hope they find ways to get him on the field. I think he will likely be more Jimmy Graham than Allen Lazard even this year in terms of, listen, we'll put you in line occasionally. We'll kind of do that insert where we stick you like under the tackle and offset on some of those run looks to kind of like give a little chip help. We're going to line you up wide. You're a wide receiver that occasionally is going to block. And then we're going to teach you how to be a tight end in the NFL. Because that's the biggest thing. When you think of like that transition, that's the biggest thing when you're going from college to the pros is they're asking you offensive line reads if you're lining up at the backfield, which LaFleur has them do. You're learning fullback reads, you're learning tight end route tree, then you're learning wide receiver route tree. Like, it's a lot of stuff to remember. So if they just simplify it for them and say, be an athlete, go out there, run routes. When we ask you to block, don't make a fool of yourself. And that's a way to get them out on the field. Because this year, more than anything, I mean, I don't think they're competing for Super Bowl this year anyway. Just find ways to get him on the field. And I think he can do it. And then he can learn how to be a good tight end down the road. But if he can just be an effective big wide receiver this year who isn't afraid to block, I mean, I hope they find ways to get him out there, because you look at the wide receiver core, there's a lot of guys that get hit. And there's also a lot of guys that got questions about it. If Musgrave could essentially be like wide receiver 3, dude, I'd love that for now and for down the line.
Yeah. And you throw in Jaden Reed, if he could pick up the playbook quick enough, that dude has all kinds of athletic ability. Here in the chat, Garrison said, referring to what we were talking about just a second ago, I mean, stealing plays is a part of the game. Feels like this is just the first generation of coaches that openly talk about it. Who was it? Was it Andrew Whitworth? Was it Andrew Whitworth that said, the offensive tackle? He said, I honestly look at what everybody's doing, and I feel like they're going, oh, yeah, he ran it out of 11 personnel. I'm going to do it out of 12. He's doing it out of 12. I'm going to do it out of 13. Like, they don't call them the piss boys for nothing, right? And they're not just cleaning piss, but I think they're constantly in a pissing contest, a pissing match.
Well, and I can't remember who it was on the podcast. Someone did mention it on the podcast where they were like, oh, McVay, like, he ran out this new play, and it was a post-game press conference. He's like, no, I stole that from so-and-so. And that was it. Like, everyone steals, no one talks about it. I loved one of my favorite bits, and it's because it was LaFleur, and it's because it was one of those, like, boy, I'd love to be a fly on that wall. When she went to go visit LaFleur in his office, and he's sitting there with all the tabs up, cut-ups from the Chiefs and the Niners and all that. And LaFleur's quote was one of my favorite quotes. He just says, I'll steal from anyone, man. I don't care. It is. I think Garrison's right. And it does sound like that was the case when McVay basically said, no, I stole that play from such and such. That was kind of no one really talked about that. So it is. I do like that they will give credit, but to your point, Clayton, I also like that there is still that level of one-upsmanship that I'm going to run this, but I'm not going to run it the way I'm not going to give you the credit for like you giving me this idea. I've got to switch this up enough. I like they're still competing, even though they're not even in the same cities anymore.
I was going to say they're all in different buildings across the country, but it's still that competition that was right there in Washington, where they said that they would. I can't remember who it was that leaned in the door and heard them all yelling and cussing each other out, and he said, "Hey, do you guys realize how effing lucky you are?" Right? Like they're still competing. They're still competing. There's no doubt about it. Now, I personally, I could be wrong, Dusty, but I personally believe the Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur friendship is a little fractured. When we beat them after the whole draft day reporting that Aaron Rodgers was being shopped to San Francisco.
Oh, yeah.
When we beat them that year, did you see the way LaFleur shook his hand and kind of slapped him on the back and didn't even make eye contact? I kind of feel like that was orchestrated out of San Francisco. Like they were the ones that leaked that information out and made it tried to make it sound like the Packers were trying to trade Aaron Rodgers when indeed they were the ones who reached out to Green Bay. I could be reading too much into it. Maybe I want that to be true to make the rivalry a little more fierce, but it just felt different that year. It really did.
I thought that for a while. It's kind of one of those. I don't like to read too much of that unless it's like Harbaugh trying to fight Jim Schwartz on the field. I try not to read too much of like post game reactions or anything. But I mean, I think after listening to the podcast, I could very much see it as like LaFleur was mad, and then he kind of showed that on the field. But a week later, he was fine. Like I wouldn't be shocked if that's the case because the way they kind of are, it seems like, is they fight. They'd scrap, they'd go at each other. I mean, you mentioned even Saleh and Shanahan, even in the same building. He's like, Saleh's like, there's like sometimes a week we wouldn't talk, and then we get back together and it's like nothing changed, like everything was fine. Like, so I wouldn't be shocked if like LaFleur was mad. He did make a point of that. And then within 3 days was like, just he had forgotten, he had moved on at that point. Like that wouldn't shock me a single bit after listening to this.
Yeah, and I can't remember if it was Raheem or who it was, but they's talking about how they were sitting in the room and they're all arguing. You know, this is back in Washington now, and he's mother effing Matt, who's sitting right next to Kyle, and then of course they holler down the hall to McVay to get confirmation on who was right. And Mike McDaniel's going, "Hey, dude, everybody calm down." It's just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I'm telling you guys, if you haven't heard it, go listen to it. We are not doing it justice. And again, another shout out to Jordan for just doing an amazing job, and the Athletic for giving the freedom to do it. It's
and the amount of access she got is tremendous. Like we heard from all of those guys. We heard from all the main players in the story. We heard from some a little less than others, but like we talked about it before we started recording. Some of the stuff McVay was kind of talking about, some of his darker moments last year, like. He's very open. They were all very open about a lot of that stuff, which is fascinating, I think, to hear directly from them.
Yeah, and like you said offline too, Jordan isn't just a reporter. Jordan knows X's and O's. Jordan understands football. Like I would love to sit down and take notes on her breaking down film. Like she's on that level.
She did a big thing, I think, when after Staley was hired, because she's a beat writer for the Rams for the Athletic and has been for a while, so she knows those guys pretty well. When Staley got hired, she did a bit, like, it was still in my mind one of the best. Cody Alexander is doing is tremendous in terms of like understanding that quarter's defense, and she leveraged him somewhat for that series. But her explaining not just kind of what Staley wanted to implement, why he wanted to implement it, what the benefits were, and then kind of like the human impact of that. That's still one of my favorite things she's ever done. It's just like kind of understanding the defense from all angles, not just the X's and O's. You understand what they're trying to do, how they're trying to accomplish it, but how the players on the field do that, and like how that affects other people as well. She does incredible work and has been for a very long time now.
Absolutely, I completely agree. All right, as we get ready to wrap up, the last thing that kind of sticks out to me is player input. The one thing about this coaching tree is they want player input. They are open to communication from the players and what makes them comfortable. I think it was during that dark time, actually before the dark time, before McVay won the Super Bowl, I remember reading a quote from someone. It was his quote that was reported that he said the reason he moved on from Jared Goff to Matt Stafford is he wanted a partner. He didn't want a pupil. And he knew Matt Stafford would kind of help him mold this offense. It's the same thing you've seen Sean Payton do with Drew Brees in New Orleans. It's the same thing you've seen McCarthy and Rodgers do back in the day as Rodgers began to kind of cut his teeth in the business and working his way up to this all-pro quarterback, McCarthy started to lean on him more for ideas. In Washington, I'll just rattle them off real quick, and I want to get your parting thoughts. Washington letting RG3 install that play, right, and having him take ownership of it. In Atlanta, being willing to deviate from what you're used to and utilizing that up tempo, that turbo package, just evolving. The LA Rams taking that up tempo there and maximizing what Jared Goff could do. Another thing too, Dusty, he was talking about, they would get to the line of scrimmage so quick that the comms would still be on in the helmet, and he would tell him where to throw the football. Literally, McVay would go, all right, man.
Which was, and that was fascinating because I've heard that before. I mean, that's a story that's been going on for a while. But then hearing from, I can't remember who it was that was saying, I think it was RG3, is that's a blessing and a curse, because as you're going up and trying to make your checks at the line, you got McVay in your helmet going, make sure you check that backside safety. And he's like, it's hard to kind of get your bearings right when you're trying to diagnose on one side, then you've got your coach in your ear telling you something else, and how that is a bit of a blessing and a curse. I know, which is not really a side I had heard of before, which is
really cool. And the equivalent to that would be sit down and read a book and tell someone to give you instructions while you're reading that book. It would drive you insane. I couldn't tell you how many times I've done it to my wife. She's done it to me. We've stopped and went, what? I can't read and listen to you too. In San Francisco, back to LA. Once Stafford arrived, how they kind of allowed him to have freedom. And even with the offensive line, do you remember him and Andrew Whitworth? They changed the running scheme mid-game, right?
During the Dallas game, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they talked about how they went to more of kind of that, not wide zone, but more like a midline. And I think the middle three in that line worked out the blocking on that, on the sidelines between plays, I think, which seems insane.
And telling Gurley, hey, look, don't even worry about reading it. Just hit it here. Hit the hole here. And then Sean McVay's perspective on the sideline was like, yeah, do it, run it, go ahead. Yeah, it's working. Let's do it. That's the thing. People, they try to paint this picture that, they won't run their offense. They don't want to run their offense. They're trying to do checks at the line, this and that. There's a lot of freedom, especially with veteran players. And that's something that this tree, I came away feeling like they're not afraid to give them a little bit of that freedom. You've seen it with LaFleur and Rodgers. Obviously LaFleur talked about in that podcast, he gets to Green Bay and he goes, Rodgers is pretty good. Devontae's arguably the best receiver in the last 5 years. So what did they do? In 2020, they began leaning on the isolation game. And it's something that Greg Cosell talks about a lot with the boundary X. The boundary X typically is an ISO play. You're putting that guy out there to try to isolate him on that DB. And just giving Rodgers the freedom. And, of course, we heard Rodgers say on the McAfee show that Devontae is free to run whatever route he wants at any time. He's basically reading the defense, especially in those ISO X plays. Read the defense, run, and maybe he was exaggerating. I don't know. Rodgers is never exaggerated. We know that. But he made it sound as if he come to the line and was like, that's all I'll tell you. I didn't know he was going to run that. I remember him saying that. But again, LaFleur giving them that freedom, especially in 2020, 1 year after they'd already gotten 1 full year under their belt, for them to kind of, especially like we talked about with the RPO game. In Seattle, you kind of seen it with Shane Waldron too. For those of you who don't know, Shane Waldron comes over from the LA Rams after they win a Super Bowl, and he is the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. When I watched the tape for them, because I was trying to put this to bed, everybody was screaming, they're not running LaFleur's system. They're not running LaFleur. I'm going to go watch Miami. I'm going to watch Seattle. I'm going to watch San Francisco. I'm going to watch LA. Everybody, Cincinnati, everybody who's got any kind of ties to this Shanahan tree, I'm going to go watch it. And everybody was doing things different. The first play from scrimmage, what did Seattle do that I watched, man? I watched their opening, which is kind of, if you watch the openers, and I know you know this, Dusty, for the listeners, typically the openers are a pretty good reflection on what the game plan is. These are scripted plays. This is what we're going to try to exploit, at least early in the game. They came out in an empty set, and I'm going, why ain't nobody saying this ain't Shanahan's system? You know what I mean? Because everybody is evolving. And then, of course, in Miami, we kind of talked about that, I kind of felt like they were more mirroring San Francisco, but like you said, they were leaning on the pass a lot more. Why? Because you got Tyreek Hill. You've got Jalen Waddle. You've got these – you have got to play to your strengths as far as personnel. Players win them. Coaches lose them. I hate saying it because I don't want to believe it's true, but that's a Belichick quote, and I'm going to go with the GOAT over my dumb redneck football knowledge. So with that being said, man, as we wrap up, what do you got? What's parting thoughts? What sticks out to you?
Yeah, I'll throw honestly for the examples. I'll throw Zach Taylor in there as well. Taylor's a guy we haven't really talked about. Obviously, the head coach up in Cincinnati, and he talked about when he got to Cincinnati. He was, I think his first year was when they drafted Joe Burrow. He wanted to do under center play action. The same thing you think about Shanahan. He wanted to do under center play action. He wanted to kind of base stuff off the run game. And he said, they basically went straight drop back. I don't know what their play action numbers are, but he said they went straight drop back, this past year especially, based almost everything out of spread gun. And he was like, because that's Joe Burrow. That's what Joe Burrow was good at, and that's what he wants to do. And I think to me, it's something to kind of hammer home a little bit for me, and also for other people that don't quite watch as much football as you or I do and try to dig into some of this stuff. When you talk about a system, when you talk about like implementing a guy's system, we're trying to do this system. There's not one way to do it. There's not one system. That's one thing. And LaFleur's talked about that this year as well. People, I've heard people ask him, so are we going to see a more pure version of your system this year? He's like, well, it's never been my system. It's our system. And and I've been saying that. I know you've been saying that as well, in terms of like the best systems. It's not a rigid system. You're looking at like, what do I believe? What do I believe will work as far as a coach? How do I want to accomplish my goals? What do I believe in terms of the passing game, the running game, overall philosophy? But then also, how do I get that to work with the players? I don't know if I just froze there. How do I get that to work with the players that I have? How do I get them not only to buy in, but how do I get them to run it well? Because we mentioned it with Goff. If McVay just went straight saying, all right, we're going, I don't like the way the defense is going. This doesn't work with the way we want to go. I want to change up. This is still my system, but the way I see it being most successful, I need to get a little more spread gun. We're still going to run the same stuff. I need to go spread gun because this is the way I want to do it. And I'm going to have you, Jared Goff, do this. That is destined to fail. So he went and found something that wasn't. And if you look at if LaFleur comes in and says, we're going 12 personnel, we're going play action, we're running 51% of the time, you, Aaron Rodgers, are doing everything from under center, shotgun, and like barely anything under shotgun. We're doing under center, doing under play action, we're doing everything motion. Rodgers would maybe burn the building down at this point. So it's a marriage. The best thing, it's a marriage of what do I as a coach want to accomplish? What do I believe? What are the pieces I have? I mean, it's even more apparent if you listen to guys who coach college, guys who coach high school, because that, especially high school, you listen to high school coaches, it's not only that base turns over every 4 years. A lot of times you listen to some like all the hell mummy stuff. It's like, or even Mouse Davis. The Mouse Davis is like, I want to run like a running system in high school, but all I had were small guys and we were just getting beat up. And so like I'll throw my short guy in the flat and that worked. All right, we're going up tempo and we're going spread and we're doing run and shoot stuff, which is how some of that stuff started. Like I think to me that it kind of hammered home this idea that hopefully some of the questions will stop.
Right.
There is not one way to run this. A system is not a rigid thing. A system is for that word. I hate the word system. That the system itself is a living, breathing thing.
Yes.
That changes, that will change, that should change based on league evolution, based on who you have in the building, based on what they're good at. I mean, I can't remember if it was in this podcast or not. It was this like, I think it was episode 1. I think Shanahan said something like, you don't have to be good at everything, but you better be able to do something.
Yeah.
And then you build that something out of that. You work with what you have. And I think more than anything, it hammered home, not just that these guys are all very good offensive minds, very thoughtful in terms of, I know they talked about LaFleur as like the most detailed guy, thoughtful in terms of like how they want this to work, how they want everything to work, but also flexible enough to be able to change what they want to do or change that personnel based on who they have. I think it's just, again, fascinating to look into that stuff as far as like getting into the minds of those coaches. And again, even hammering home, these guys all come from the same tree. And like you said, you look at them. If someone never told you Mike McDaniel coached under Sean McVay, there'd be nothing. There'd not be nothing. There wouldn't be a whole lot there to tie those guys together in terms of like what they did this past year.
Right.
So I could go on and on about it. I think it's a fascinating to look into this offense that is just huge in the NFL right now. Not only how it came to be, but kind of how these guys each play their part and see their part in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about it being rigid and people they want to assume that, oh no, this is one way of doing it. Again, let's recap, guys. Bill Walsh, vertical passing, quarterback gets hurt. His backup strength was short passes, accurate, quick processing, decision-making. What's he do? He creates the West Coast offense, right? He goes to the 49ers, obviously matches the footwork up with Joe Montana, which he's always said was the greatest asset that Joe Montana had was his footwork. And everything is timing-based. 3-step drops, 5-step drops. Everything correlates perfectly with the offense. He's utilizing what he's got, right? Mike Shanahan goes to Denver, brings in the zone blocking system. Why? Because Terrell Davis was phenomenal, and John Elway was mobile enough to run boot action off of it. Get to Washington. Again, if the Shanahan offense is so rigid, then why is he not running the read option right now? He's not doing it because he doesn't do RG3. He bring in RG3, marries up the pistol, the read option with the outside zone. They're off and running. Atlanta, the hurry up, which they called the turbo package. That's something they did different to kind of match what they had there with Julio Jones. And, of course, that great running attack as well. LA Rams take it with them, right? When they go out to LA with McVay and LaFleur, they get the most out of golf, they being McVay, running the kind of that quick look. Of course, he brings in Stafford, changes things up just like Dusty said, on and on and on and on down the road. This from the 1970s, this West Coast offense has constantly been evolving. And I think they said that, like you said, early in the podcast, he said Mike Shanahan envisioned marrying up this zone blocking scheme to the West Coast offense. And when he envisioned it as being something it's breathing. It's always evolving. It's always changing. And it's about staying one step ahead. But again, it's so profound. And we'll end it with this is on offense, all you're doing is attacking space. On defense, all you're doing is defending that space. And that space is constantly moving. And it's a copycat league. Everything is cyclical. It's just, I'm excited, dude. I'm excited to see, does it finally turn back to the heavy formation days? Does it ever get to that point? I don't think it does, but I wouldn't rule it out.
I think it's tricky, and she does talk about that. Talk about the future of the league, and that was one of my favorite bits too, where she was like, "Where does it go next?" All the coaches were like, "Well, I don't really know." And they're like, "Well, of course they're not going to talk about like what's going to come next and with the pine on that."
Tell you exactly where it's going.
Yeah, let me tell you. Here's my playbook. I mean, I've always thought at some point it will turn back to you get hybrid guys, you get bigger bodies, so you get bigger bodies to counter that, and now you're running power against undersized linebackers who are slightly oversized safeties and like linemen who have gotten smaller, and then you can dominate them. But I think the way athletes have gone, the way body types have gone, I think it's really I don't know if there's ever going to be one way you can do that. I think it's a mix of power game and spread football with, some of what the Eagles did this past year, honestly, right? Like it's power run, it's spread football, and a quarterback that can move a little bit. I think that's, and I do want to say one more thing is that, so they interviewed Chris Brown on the podcast, and he used to, I don't think he writes anymore. He's a lawyer, but he wrote a couple books under Smart Football. He's one of the guys that taught me about football, like reading his work, the old Grantland days. He's got a couple kind of collected articles and books called Smart Football. And he did something with Ted Nguyen a couple of years ago over The Athletic about like watching football on your couch. What are you looking for? And one of my favorite things, because it relates to this idea of space. So he said, what do you look for when you're watching from a couch? You can see, limited view with the broadcast. What are you looking for? And Chris Brown said, watch the green. You look at the green. Where is their open green on the field? And then from there, he's like, you're looking at how does the offense try to take that and how does the defense try to take that away? He's like, you will learn a ton about football that way. And then I listened to this podcast, and Chris Brown was on it. Chris Brown didn't say it, but then Sal was talking about like covering up and moving the pockets. I was like, that's watching the green. Like all of the base of my football philosophy and what I know comes from Chris Brown. At this point can be summed up in watch the green, because that's the open field. That's where the offense is trying to attack. How do they attack that? How do they create that? And then how does the defense take that away? And this is such a fascinating look into this one. I'm sorry to go on that, but I heard Chris Brown in there, and I was like, I can't get out of here without mentioning that.
Absolutely. As you were saying that, I'm just going. I'm thinking of John Madden. I'm thinking of, first of all, steal from your opponents. Find something that's working and maximize it. When he became a head coach, he said, I'm going to take that vertical passing game that I learned. I think he was with Sid Gilman in college, I believe, before he went to the Raiders. But he also attended a workshop with a coach you guys have probably heard of. That was Vince Lombardi. And he said, I sat there and watched Vince Lombardi. He said he taught for hours on one play, the power sweep, one play. And he said, I sat in the back like I was in church or something. Like, I know what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of, he said, I realized after hearing him talk about that one play for multiple hours, he said, I'm a fraud. I don't know a damn thing is what he said. But what did he do? He takes over in Oakland, and what's he do? He attaches that passing scheme, and he steals Lombardi's power sweep. And I love they asked him, why did you always run left? And he mentioned all the Hall of Famers. He had a Hall of Fame left tackle, had a Hall of Fame left guard, had a Hall of Fame center. He said, why the hell wouldn't I run left? Are you kidding me? Like,
football is so hard, but sometimes it can be so simple, dude. Like, my best guys are there. I will just do what they do.
I love it, man. Again, we could go for hours. I'm going to let you go, Dusty. Dude, you're the best. I can't thank you enough for jumping on here, man. Thank you for carving out time. I know you got family and everything, and every time you're on, it's a hit. I always learn something. I appreciate your friendship, and I appreciate your time, man, just talking ball. It's always awesome.
Always up to talk football with you, dude. I learned something from you as well. Love what you're doing. Absolutely killing it. This has been a blast. Let's do it again, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, we're going to get out of here. For those of you listening on the pod, we appreciate you making us a part of your day. Thanks to everybody in the chat here. And as always, let's go out and be the change we want to see in the world, and go Pack Go.
The power sweep actually is the lead play in our offense.
Tell the tackle to take the defensive end if he's over him. If he's not, you drive down the first man who is inside. Pull back and tell him to take the first man outside the offensive tackle. No one shows. Go right by them and field inside. If the YN has the linebacker taken out, he cuts inside. If the YN has the linebacker in, he comes all the way around. If you look at this play, what we're trying to get is a seal here and a seal here, and try to run this play in the